We need a coffee break. And if you would like to buy the Don a cup of coffee, go ahead because we're letting it happen.
Visit www.buymeacoffee.com/the Dawn of Wrestling.
If you got $1, $10, $20, $30, $40, $50, a C note, $100,000 note.
www.buymeacoffee.com/the Dawn of Wrestling.
And salute to all who contribute to this cup of coffee.
In smoky rooms where deals are made, loyalty the ace he's played. A friend of ours, he'll stand up tall. Through gunfire smoke, he'll never fall. With heart of gold and steel resolve, a mystery we'll never solve.
Woo. Brothers and sisters, welcome back. Welcome back to another exciting edition of the Friend of Ours podcast, a limited edition series hosted by your main man, Duke Loves Rasslin. And of course, the Don himself, one of the greatest of all time, and a man who does not want to listen to my problems. Big Vito LoGrasso. What's going on there, Vito?
I can't believe I'm listening to this guy's problems. You know, guys, you want to know how we start off our day? He runs and he goes to his favorite coffee shop, buys himself coffee. Then he gets back in his little Jedi and goes back to his house in his 5-foot parking spot. You know what I mean? Because he doesn't want to spend. He's cheap. So, he runs upstairs, pity-patting his little feet in his friggin' bed slippers, gets behind the computer. And then he gets in, he starts typing away because he's an astute, educated entrepreneur. And then, we get together and we start off, hey, I'm a guy. Everybody remembers that. This should be on a t-shirt. I'm a guy. I got coffee. I'm a guy. Okay? I'm telling you, it's something, guys. It's something.
He alluded to it. Thank you. Thank you to all of you wonderful listeners out there. We have struck gold. The number 3 most listened to podcast that covers the Sopranos. And here's the crazy part, folks. This is not a Sopranos show. It's not like that's the only thing we talk about. We just been covering that the last few weeks here, going over the different characters, and the response has been tremendous. We appreciate it. But literally, the fact that in the world, when people search for podcasts that cover the Sopranos, we're number 3. And I know that number 1 is the podcast hosted by the lady who played Adriana. So, we're in some pretty good company there. If just a couple of weeks in, we're already number 3 on that list there. That's pretty damn outstanding. So again, thank you for all you wonderful listeners. I see it. Not only are you listening, you are sharing the show with others. Every single week, we're adding more and more people. This is wonderful. We can't thank you enough. And like we said before, once we wrap up The Sopranos, we're going to be going to The Godfather. And I know that's going to be through the roof because it's a hot button topic, all 3. So can't wait for that. But, Don Vito, the fact that we can be that high up there for people looking for information about The Sopranos, how does that feel?
I think it's a great accomplishment. And remember, people, we started out from zero to number 3 rated show in The Sopranos. And I got to say, it's definitely an accomplishment. It's definitely something to be proud of. But without the people listening, thank you, fans, for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. Duke appreciates it. I hope I know you guys are definitely enjoying the show. You got to laugh at the content because like I always said with Duke, before we started this, I says, Duke, our conversations are worth gold. I says, if we ever put this on, on tape, I says, you people would have a blast. I said, we just, had a conversation where we were laughing and talking about, people think like, we just sit there and we talk about what's going on. We definitely talk about world news. We talk about our lives. We talk about what goes on, what we deal with daily from, Duke's position, and what he does and position I'm in life. And we definitely compare notes. And Duke definitely finds out some great things about me, which he didn't know. And, it's something to say for all you guys out there. Sometimes when you're worldly, you have more knowledge than the people who are educated and have the certificates on the wall. And I think that's a big topic that could be, construed in a good way and a motivator for the people who might be down on themselves, who might not think they're worth anything in the world. But knowledge is key. And if you could share it and help people, you're 10 times above the next person who has all that knowledge in his head and the certificate on the wall because he doesn't know how to apply it to help people.
Indeed. Indeed. There's a lot going on here, folks. And listen, all of you listening, you're highly intelligent, wonderful folks out there. You hear the quality of conversation and deep diving that Vito and I do. We're talking about life. Yes, we're using shows like The Sopranos. We did Mob Wives. We talked about Boardwalk Empire. We're using those shows to discuss life and relationships in life and things that we've seen and things we've heard and lessons that we've learned and what have you. And that's really a sweet spot here. That's why this thing continues to grow, because finally people having a real conversation about things and using entertainment as a frame of reference, but the entertainment is based on real life. So it's all relatable. It's wonderful, wonderful stuff there. So again, thank you. Keep that train going because we're not stopping anytime soon. Speaking of which, on this episode, we are going to be talking about Carmela Soprano, legitimately one of the most beloved characters in the history of television. And, with the hardware to prove it, Edie Falco, who played that character, such an accomplished actress in her own right, celebrated, especially for the way that she portrayed the Carmela Soprano character. If I'm not mistaken, she's won, Golden Globes and what have you. She's been nominated a bunch of times, but she actually has won. Yeah, actually, in the Emmy Awards for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series, 1999, 2001, 2003. How do you beat that? 2 Golden Globes, 3 Screen Actors Guild Awards. Jesus, that's how great Edie Falco played this character, and that's how much this character resonated with everybody. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Before I even start with the historical stuff there, Vito, from a general standpoint, Carmela Soprano, when you think about the way that character was portrayed, did it feel like a real person to you? Did it feel like, yeah, I know that lady. Yeah, that makes sense. Talk to me about it.
Well, Edie Falco was the wife of Tony Soprano, the mob boss for the Soprano family. So when you're talking about the lifestyle and knowing what your husband does for a living, the one thing that you always have to remember is you stay quiet, you don't ruffle feathers. You know, it is what it is. Very famous saying, it is what it is. And, you accept the gifts that come with it. And if you're a good mob wife, you accept the lifestyle and you accept what goes on. Your children are going to be taken care of. You're going to live a good life. You're going to have what you need. You're going to live an elegant life. But there is a price to pay for being that lady. Not that you are anything bad is going to happen to you, but what comes with it? You have FBI agents that might come into your home. You have news like newspapers or talk or possibility of a scandal that you might have to indulge with. You might have people speak on the outside and treat you different because your husband is somebody. But then you also deal with the gumads on Thursday night, the girlfriends on Saturday night, late nights, staying out, not knowing what your husband's doing. He's always out of the house. Um, that is always in the mix somewhere. So there's a lot of different avenues to look at it. But when you get tired of it and you're lonely and you want to have your own, that's when things went bad for Carmella. Not to say that you're not allowed to have fights with your husband, but when you want to try and get out, nobody ever gets out. Am I right, Duke?
You're absolutely right. There's no getting out. This is the life. You know what I mean? You know what you signed up for. So it is what it is. And that was by choice. She chose to be part of this thing.
Yep,
So she's got to ride it
that's
out
for
to the
sure.
end. You know?
And the great thing about this is that she didn't have a giant Italian mole on her face, which are things I appreciated that.
What
Not
is
being
that?
serious.
What is that?
Look at all the women who were in Goodfellas and how the moles were on their faces and on the cheeks of their ass, right? Edie Falco is a very pretty lady, and she played a lot of different parts, right? When she was in Oz, totally different. And when she was in that,
Nurse Jackie.
uh, yes, Nurse Jackie, that's exactly what I was going to do. That was another different character that she played. But when she played Soprano, she had a good look of what a wife should look like. She always had her hair done. Her nails were done. She was upkept. She was, she's a beautiful lady, and it was something that went good with her. And it's just like being the president's wife. You have to have a certain look to be with the president. You're on a scale where you're watched, and when you're on a scale where people look, and that's just the way it is. And when it comes to hosting parties at your house, you have to be, a certain way. Everybody's welcome. How are you doing? It's Sunday dinners, and like those are things I miss in that culture because those things are not there no more. And then when I lived in Staten Island, you know, one of the things I miss is Sunday dinners. I miss the bistro on Thursday nights. I miss the nights when I used to go out and have dinner in my favorite club. Those are things I miss. Maybe going to my favorite diner. And these are things that they lived on a daily basis. And like people take for granted. So I mean, there's good things and bad things about being a mob boss's wife.
Indeed. There's good things, there's bad things. Now, Carmella, she and Tony were high school sweethearts. So they grew up together. They were dating from the beginning since they were kids. And they built a nice life. She's a stay-at-home mom. They raised two kids. And she's always having people over the house, always cooking, always hosting, trying to put a positive spin on things. Anybody comes by, oh, hey, come on, you want something to eat? Yeah, you're always welcome here, whatever. Classic, typical Italian wife, old school. You know what I mean? My home is the gathering place. You are welcome here. But if you're welcome here, then that means you're part of my family. So I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to make sure that you have something to drink. I'm going to, say something positive to you. I'm going to leave you with good feelings. It's such an interesting uh, dichotomy there because as she's doing that, she knows who her husband is. She knows the line of work that he's in. She knows that he's a boss. She knows he has to do some not so nice things. And yet she puts up, I'm not going to call it a front, but she's doing her part in trying to show a positive homemaker image. And that's important because, like you said, when the FBI comes around and things go wrong and stuff like that, they got they get a warrant and they're checking the house and stuff. If she's just walking around like she's some kind of tough lady, like she's in the life and things like that, that's only going to make things worse. So she has to be a square. She has to be a civilian. She has to, present, we're just a normal, regular Italian American family. Our kids, we take care of our kids. They go to school. My husband works. I take care and manage the house. I invite people over or whatever. Like, this is what we do, just like everybody else in New Jersey. It's such an interesting thing there because at the same time, even though there's some conflict in regard to, I have all these nice things and we live this nice lifestyle, what does he have to do in order to maintain that? And she kind of goes back and forth throughout the series on that. But in the end, she has to accept the fact that in order for us to live like this, he has to do what he has to do. And I need to accept that. So here's my question to you, Vito. Talk to me about the women. Talk to me about the wives. Talk to me about the folks who have to deal with that double edged sword. I'm not talking the regular, what I mean, guy who's out there knocking off parking meters and vending machines and things like that. I'm talking about the bosses. I'm talking about the decision makers. I'm talking about the guys who are high up there. When you think about their wives and what image their wives projected to the world, talk to me about that. What did you observe and how does that relate to the Carmela Soprano character?
Okay, so when you talk about the Carmela Soprano character, there was another lady who was a mob boss wife, and now we're talking about the movie Goodfellas. We're talking about Lorraine Bracco, who was Henry Hill's wife, right? Now she had turned down the role of being Tony Soprano's wife, and she wound up being the psychiatrist. Now, I just want to give you a different look and a different feel. Now, you're talking about Lorraine Bracco, who, um, in the movie Goodfellas, was a great mob boss's wife. I mean, she played that part to the nines, right? But when you looked at how she looked now, older, she just didn't have that ultra mob boss wife feel, and her part in the Sopranos was more based on what she did of being a doctor, being more mature. She still had a fling, had her moments, but she was more subdued than the other character. When you look at Carmella compared to the mob boss's wives in the everyday living, you know, it's a very good similarity because you're talking about people who were connected or weren't um, distanced from that lifestyle. Edie Falco, I believe. Do correct me if I'm wrong. I believe she's Italian. Edie Falco.
Absolutely. Falco's an Italian name. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So I didn't want to, mislead our listeners. So being that she's Italian, she already had a head start on what it was and what it took to be this character. So she was ahead of the game. So it wasn't as much as to act. It was more of you're feeding off your feelings, which made her a more realistic character for us to watch on a daily basis. What she dealt with and how she handled herself and how she handled her own personal life when Meadow wanted to go to college and she says, "Hi, I'd like this favor. I'll go talk to my husband if she couldn't handle it." Or it was handled and she went to her husband, you know? And she wasn't pushy in her power, but she did use it to her advantage in certain situations. And, you know, it was a good thing, never a bad thing. But then when Carmella, like every other mob wife, um, in the infidelity situation, there is that knowing that your husband's out there having affairs, and if it comes to you or somebody says something, and like I always said, and we joke about this, but it is the truth. Thursday night is Gumad night. It's my night. It's Cosmo night. You know, you take out the girlfriends to the club. Nobody says nothing. Wives are at home. Saturday, you go back to the same club and you're there with your wife. So everybody knows what's going on. You know what I mean? But nobody says nothing. And at times, word does get around and the wife has to turn her head or look the other way. I'm sure inside the house, when they come home, it is it's a slugfest. Just like in Gotti with John Gotti and his wife, uh, Victoria, when John used to come home, you know, it wasn't as much as women because John Gotti you never seen with a woman, but she just didn't like at times the lifestyle of him not being home and a family man. So I just think that when it comes down to it, a mob wife or the lady of who's married to a mobster, there's a feeling of loneliness and secludedness and being isolated. And that's where we get into will they have the nerve to go out and have an affair, knowing that if the husband finds out, that guy is done. Carmella fell in love with Furio, and Furio, was, that charismatic guy, and she had a crush on him. Then there was another gentleman who she had a crush on. I mean, and this was just out of loneliness and knowing that she had been cheated on. So there was a long list of things. There's a long list of things that happen. And then when Carmella finally, kissed somebody, there was a gentleman named Victor who had lost his wife, and they were attracted to each other, and he was the house painter, and suddenly the things were got a little hot and bothered.
And I wasn't too impressed with the fact that she was flirting with the Catholic priest who's flirting with her back, and she had the thing for Furio, who was a hitman from Sicily, so he was a zip. And then, like you said, the guy who was the painter, the construction guy, she had a little thing with him. I wasn't impressed by that, but then again, I wasn't impressed with Tony with all his gumads, strippers, and all that other good stuff there. I just think that Carmela Soprano character is a perfect example of a woman who had to give up on her hopes and dreams in order to survive. This guy is going to provide for you. He's going to protect you. He's going to give you the life that you want. In exchange for your loyalty, and you're going to have to do your part by taking care of home. Bear the kids, raise the kids, keep the house clean, make sure there's always food, all that good stuff. Put on a good face. So I think that throughout the series, and this is part of the reason why Edie Falco got so many awards, she accurately showed the perspective of a woman having to find a way to survive in that life. And as you just pointed out, Carmella was far from perfect. She knew her husband was out there doing his thing, so she started to kind of do her own thing. She had a mental and emotional breakdown, and then she wanted her own house to be built, but she wanted to own it. It's my thing. You know what I mean? That's my investment. That's my home away from home. I can get away from everybody and be there. There was a lot going on with her and that stuff there. Now, here's an irony here, Vito, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Meadow Soprano, who we covered before, Meadow was so liberal and free, curious about life, just like kids are. But as she grew older, she felt like she knew everything. And her mother would clash a lot. Meadow wanted to study law, and she eventually did. She became a lawyer and all that good stuff. And there was a conflict there. I know that my father is a mafia don, and I'm over here learning the law and want to practice law. How does that work? And the mother having to straighten her out and say, listen, you spoiled little kid. The reason why you have the lifestyle that you have is because your father is the way that he is. So before you start judging and looking down on him, looking down on us as a family, just consider the fact that you wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for all of what he does. Now, on the surface, that's a normal interaction between a parent and a child. Happens all the time. Happens in every family. It doesn't matter what you're doing. But below the surface, Carmela Soprano resented Meadow, her own daughter, because her daughter had the freedom that she never was able to have. And even though Carmela sacrificed everything in order to make it possible for Meadow to have that freedom, it was still difficult for Carmela to have to confront that freedom right in her face. Because no matter what Carmela does in life, she'll never be as free as her daughter Meadow. So that's my perspective on that, Vito. I want to hear it from you. Am I on the right track with that whole relationship there between the mother and the daughter?
Absolutely. I mean, it is 100% spot on. It was a jealousy thing, and when you give your child, I mean, is it wrong to look at your child and see her grow and get to do things and you know go to law school, have it, have the opportunity to travel the world and do these things? Absolutely. I mean, it is a great thing. But when you're talking about you know a mother being jealous of the independence of her daughter, and for her going out and do these things when you helped her achieve this, all the things that you didn't want, I don't want for you, I want you to be different from me. There does get to be a jealousy, amongst moms and daughters, especially if the father treats the daughter extra special, like that's his pumpkin, or that. I mean, it's a father daughter thing, and there's always some daddy's little girl. And if your daughter's treated like that, I mean, you are going to get jealous because you're supposed to be, you know, the husband, the apple of your husband's eye. But if it's the child, sometimes gets more attention. There is going to be jealousy. I mean, it's just normal. And Carmela felt jealousy, of Meadow, because she got to do all these things while Carmela just was a housewife. It wasn't until later that she tried to build a house, like you said, and she tried to be a contractor. She tried to do things, but Tony sabotaged all these plans, and it was negated. And Carmela, if she didn't like Tony, didn't like being there, why'd you stay in the house, that big luxurious house? Go get an apartment somewhere. If you didn't want to be with me, why are you staying living in the place where I provided for you? You didn't gain all this stuff. I did. So why are you still here? You follow my point? So, I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the goose. But when the gander doesn't like it, hey, that's why, like, is a saying you have, if you don't like the accommodations, there's the fucking door. Go ahead, walk through it. And don't break my balls. Man, that was Italian.
That's
I like
exactly
that
it.
joke.
That I know I was going to say you're spitting hot fire now, brother. But that was exactly it. You know what I mean? Don't break my balls here. Uh, Carmela had to give up everything in order for her children to have everything, and I do give credit where credit is due. Eventually, Meadow understands and accepts the fact that, listen, again, in order for me to be who I am and where I am, all of that my parents are doing and have done, that had to happen. This is our life for better or for worse. So I could either rail against it and resist it, or I can roll with it. So she ends up in the final episode of the whole series. Meadow talks about being a lawyer representing disenfranchised Italians who she feels that the system have wronged. And I find that so interesting. So essentially, she's going to end up becoming a mob attorney. She's going to be representing people like her father going forward.
Right.
And it's like, okay, that's a big change from where she was a couple years ago. So then you turn around and you look back at Tony, obviously, but you look back at Carmela and you say, damn, you raised that kid to the point where they finally got it. So in that sense, you won. You raised the kid right. Whatever the lifestyle is that you set forth for them, you wanted them to understand and appreciate it. And in the end, she does. Kudos. Deep, deep stuff, man. And listen, I know some knucklehead's going to hear that and say, well, Duke, they were criminals. How dare you? Listen, I'm not saying that I agree with it or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking about basic life lessons here. That's the point that I'm making. Every parent hopes that when their children become old enough, they respect the sacrifice that the parent had to make in order for them to exist and be able to thrive and be able to be the adult that they eventually turn out to be. And hopefully that's a productive member of society. You don't want your children to hate you. You don't want your children to hate what you've done or not understand what you've done for them. In a perfect world, you want them to at least be like, okay, I get it. And there's an irony there because Vito, throughout the history of you and I, not only talking privately, but talking on the air, and it goes well beyond the friend of ours podcast. This is our latest thing that we're doing together, but you and I go back almost a decade of recording and having these types of conversations. You always acknowledge the sacrifice that your parents made. Now, you tell the truth. You didn't always get along with your dad and things like that. You talk about the headbutting with each other and the challenges and all that good stuff. But you acknowledge, I get it. He wasn't perfect, but I get it. I understand better now why it had to be that way, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, dude, that's all you could ever hope for. Will your kids understand in the end? And will your sacrifices actually matter? Am I on the right track with that?
No, you're right. I mean, hey, Meadow butted heads with her father, and she wanted to go and do things, and Tony put his foot down, and in the end, she came around. But, it's part of growing up, like you say. And how many of us out there butt heads with our parents, butt heads with the regime, and then to come back and say years later and say, you know what? If I only listened to my mother and father when they tried to talk to me, I wouldn't have went through what I went through. And if I would just listen, things would have been easier. And I think everybody has gone through that revelation. And it's you, me, everybody, because as a kid, you think you know it all, you're going to conquer the world. But what it does is it puts you on your ass and you get conquered. And you just say, I got to smarten up here or I'm not going to make it.
Great point. So we see the evolution of this Carmela Soprano character throughout the show. We see her try to find herself because she does lose herself. Again, she has to be this housewife as opposed to being a regular human being, and she's flawed. She falls from grace. The whole thing with religion, she's a devout Catholic, and yet she kind of develops a little bit of a romance with one of the fathers from the Catholic Church. And it's like, what the hell is that? You know what I mean? It was such an interesting situation in that regard there. But that's the complexity of that character. Who else is she going to be around? How many men can she be around and have, uh, conversations with and her husband's not going to fly off the handle or suspect something or things like that. She can't talk to the other guys who are in the gang, even though eventually she does with Furio. But he's an outsider. He's part of this thing, but he's not from around here. He's not really part of this thing. He's just here for a temporary period of time. So just so many things that she went through. Every time somebody from the mob family got whacked or turned out to be a rat or whatever, how would Carmella interact with that person's wife going forward? Because all the wives had to interact with each other. They had each other. That was it. These are the women who had to be your friends because they were the only ones who could understand you. It's not like she had friends who were outside of the life. Everybody was part of the life who she interacted with, right? So
Right.
when these things happen, though, you start to see the distancing of her from these other wives, because it's like, well, how do I talk to the wife of a rat? How do I maintain my relationship with that person? How do I maintain my relationship with the wife of somebody who got whacked, and especially if it's somebody who my husband may have been responsible for whacking them, or the person got whacked and my husband is responsible for avenging that death, and even if he does or if he doesn't, it doesn't change the fact that that family, that wife and those kids, they don't have their patriarch anymore. They don't have that father anymore. So even those types of situations there, and seeing how Carmela Soprano has to navigate all of that, it all contributed to her own emotional and mental breakdown. The relationship she had with her own parents, her father, who's in the construction business, and her mother, who's a homemaker, and her mother being a different version of Tony Soprano's mother, where she has that old school Italian guilt, where everything is about keeping up the appearances and what are people going to think about us? What are they going to say about us? I don't want them to see me with this kind of person. And you shouldn't talk like that. And you shouldn't do that. Why are you wearing that? All of that old school guilt that's associated with people who come from the old country, no matter what it is, whether you're Italian, you're Portuguese, you're Jamaican, you're whatever. There's that old lady guilt, always worrying about they and what do they say, what are they thinking? Because if they knew that we're involved in these little things, then they're going to look down on us. Carmella had to navigate that. Meanwhile, as her mother is carrying on like that, her parents benefit from Tony Soprano being who he is. When her father had a problem, Tony goes and shakes people up, and now the father doesn't have a problem anymore. So her parents get to maintain their lifestyle because of a guy like that. So you want to benefit from, what it means to be associated with a boss, but you don't want people to know that you're associated with the boss. How the hell does that work? And Carmella having to be in the middle of that, how does that work? Go ahead, bro.
It just doesn't. And you know what? It's just it's a difficult life. It's just difficult to be that woman in that situation. Duke, I want to say something here, right? We talked about how difficult it is. We talked about how much that the change of lifestyle. Let's cover when the wife finds out who you cheat with, which Carmella did, and she found out that Tony was having an affair with a woman with one leg. And Carmella finds that out, and she's got two good legs, but this woman with one leg was, shacking up with Tony. Or how about when the maid who has nothing is banging her husband, or the car dealer lady who goes to see the Mercedes lady. I mean, you got three different types of ladies, right? You got the maid, you got the one-legged lady, And then you got the lady who is, got the look, got the charisma, got everything, and she just oversteps her bounds. Now, that's a vast contrast of different ladies that Tony was, with. But Tony was a dog. It was just his thing. I mean, I don't blame him, but I mean, hey, everybody's got their fixes in life, and Tony just liked a variety of women. Duke, would you ever date a woman with one leg?
I'm not going to say I would never. I can say that I've never imagined that I would. If you're with somebody and she loses a leg, then you're still with that person. She's that person. So leg or no leg, yeah, that's my lady. But
So,
to pursue somebody who has one leg, I I have never imagined that I would do something like that. No.
all right. So here, I'm going to give you a Tony Soprano story. All right. We are in I'm in ECW. People, hold on for this because this is pretty cool. So I'm in ECW. Go to a nightclub in Florida. I forget which one. I see this beautiful blonde, right? And she's like kind of like a motorcycle chick. So I roll up, my smooth ways. I start dancing with her, and we start talking, and it gets kind of like serious. And she tells me I drove a motorcycle, but I only have one leg. I says, what? She told me she had one leg. She had a wooden leg, right? So I had like it was something. So I stopped it at that, and just being like kind of like a heavy makeout scene on the dance floor. But it could have went further if I would have pursued it. But like, wow, I mean, you find out like a chick's got one leg, and you're like, okay, this could be cool. This could be adventurous. Let me see what it's like. It's just like you, Duke, when you go out, maybe back in your heyday and you used to date midget ladies. I mean, it's something different. It's a variety. Somebody you're actually taller than. I mean, tell us about that, Duke.
Every week you manage to slide something in about the midgets, and I don't understand it. This is a fetish that you have. That's that's like,
What
and your
about
wife
the
is
woman?
your wife is not a midget. That's the part that makes me scratch my head. I don't know where this is coming from.
This is the best part of the show when both of us are laughing. We can't catch ourselves, folks. That's why you need to buy us a cup of coffee because we need a coffee break. But hold on. I
Unbelievable.
got to get the laugh out of me. Hold on. All right, bring it back. Come on back. We're doing a show. Keep professional. Keep professional. Duke and the midgets. I can't. But Vito with the woman with one leg. Vito with the woman with one leg. It did happen. Very sexy. I mean, she was hot. Even the guys who I was with, the ECW, said, Vito, who the hell is that? I said, that's just somebody I hooked up with. She says, you going to take on? I said, nah, she got one leg, man. I says, I got to stop it at that. No friggin' way. No way. Yeah. Then when it comes to the maid, you know, I think everybody has that secret fetish of banging the maid or her cleaning the house or, doing stuff. I lived that dream too. So that's another one. And then, of course, there's the hot, elegant Italian chick who's a Mercedes, working at a Mercedes dealer. And she's got that look. She's got all the Italian aspirations. She's got it going on, but then they become nuts. And, dating an Italian woman, they become loud and they become rambunctious and possessive. And it's just the way it is. And there are a lot of beautiful ladies who have a great temperament out there. And I got to entertain and be with a lot of them. But man, you talk about, attitude and meanness. And when it came down to it, just like Carmela Soprano in The Sopranos, when it came time for her to turn it on, she turned it on. But she had a hard time, dealing with Tony's variety of ladies. And that was a big problem with Carmela. I think that led to her demise, in the marriage, which wouldn't anybody's marriage. But it gave us a great storyline, and it kept the Sopranos fresh to see what Tony was going to do next and who he was going to be with. I mean, I was a fan. Duke, I know you're a fan, and like all of our great listeners were watching for this. Maybe they didn't focus on that back then, but now we're focusing on it because we're looking at it from Carmela's perspective. Like, who's next? Who's going to sleep with my husband now?
Good point. That was, and throughout the series, that was the push and pull. That was the challenge, you know. But as we started here, overall, Edie Falco just she crushed that character. She did such an excellent job. It was so relatable and understandable, and for me, real as a person who grew up with an Italian family at a young age. You know, I told the story before. Uh, you know, when I was still in grade school, and my family moved to East Boston. Our neighbors upstairs ended up becoming an extension of our family. The matriarch, God rest her soul, Corrine, she was fantastic. She had three daughters who, throughout the years, all three of them were our babysitters, my younger sister and I. So they looked out for us at a very important time of our lives, and a very impressionable point in our lives. You know, when I think back about the way that Corrine ran that family as the mother. Now she had a husband who, you know, he was a man, and he absolutely was a man. It was what it was. But Corrine was the rock. She was the rock of that family. She kept things together. And when she invited you into her home and she broke bread with you, that was the end of it. You're part of the family. So that means that she's going to encourage you. It means she's going to correct you when you're doing something you ain't got no business doing. It means that she's going to protect you if somebody comes after you. If she sends me down the street to go pick up a gallon of milk and a pack of cigarettes or what have you, folks, this is literally the early '90s. Um, she's calling the store and she's saying, "Hey, I'm sending the kid. He's going to come pick up a gallon of milk, pack of cigarettes. Maybe he'll buy a candy bar, but he's on his way. You make sure you give him the exact change. You make sure you don't mess with him. Nobody messes with him." And people took that because it's like, yeah, we respect her and her family, so fine. If this kid is part of that, then yeah, we're looking out for the kid. The kid is one of us as well. And it's just so interesting, that whole notion of family and togetherness and trying to keep it together, sacrifice. I saw it with my own eyes within that culture. And I've seen it in other cultures, even in my own family, in different ways. So going back to that character, that Carmela Soprano character, legitimately one of the greatest characters of all time. Just perfect. That is a real person, and worth every second of watching how her life evolved. And it's so tragic in the end how things ended up, because the screen went black. Does that mean that something happened to Carmela and the kids as well? We assume that Tony got whacked. Is it possible the whole family got whacked? So it brings you back to the whole point too of, listen, man, crime doesn't pay. That's a cautionary tale. There is a price to pay for living the life. I'm going to give you the last word on that, Vito.
When the screen goes black, it leaves the element of surprise, suspense. Let your mind go into a fantasy world of what can happen. Let you be the producer for the ending. Do they show up next week? Do they show up next year? Do they never show up again? And I think that's what the spectacular thing about the dark screen at the end of a segment, that is the greatest finish of any movie, sitcom, or anything, because you're going to sit there wondering what happened.
Indeed. So that does it for our Carmela Soprano deep dive there. Again, fantastic character. Great job, Edie Falco. Just really wonderful stuff there. And like we said, folks, we're on the road here. We're going to end up with Tony Soprano. That'll be our last say on the Sopranos series. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, Vito, what's the best way everybody can keep up with you?
Okay, guys, we're going to be at the Big Vito brand on Instagram. We're going to be on X. We're going to be on TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn under Big Vito LoGrasso. Okay. And, of course, a friend of our show here with Duke of Rasslin.
As always, Duke Loves Rasslin on Facebook, on Twitter, Duke Loves Rasslin at gmail.com. Let me know what you think. Keep sharing the show. We are going to get to The Godfather. That'll be once we're done with the Sopranos. So if you have any suggestions on what you would like to hear us talk about as it relates to The Godfather, start sending those in now, folks. Start sending those in now, because Vito and I are going to go back and we're going to be rewatching the Godfather trilogy just to make sure that everything is fresh again. So if you're making suggestions, something might actually spark our attention, like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go in that direction, what have you. I think it'll be interesting. So anyway, until next time, Big Vito, take us out with our word of the day.
Ora di pranzo.
Okay, what does that mean?
Lunchtime.
A friend of ours, he'll stand up tall. Through gunfire smoke, he'll never fall. With heart of gold and steel resolve, a mystery we'll never solve.